Welcome to another My Fastest Mile Hangout. I'm Mark Upton, and as usual, with me is Al Smith. Hello, Al.
Afternoon.
And our guest today, which we're really looking forward to speaking to, is Mark Carter. Hello, Mark.
Hi, guys.
We are well. Mark, do you want to just give us a brief idea of what you're involved in at the moment and where your interests are?
Yeah, sure. I have a few things that are going on at the moment. It can sort of be basically described as three things. So one is a program called Ministry of Football, which is a children's skill development program for ages from about 4 or 5 years upwards. I also work with 15 primary schools in the collaboration called Future Zone, which is a collaboration of Islington primary schools. And I'm a statistician. Just finished a contract with government regulators, and I've had a sort of diverse experience of working in various different places, looking at data and what it means to organisations.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is an interesting mix, isn't it? Particularly that last one,
Oh.
contrasting with the first two, Mark.
Yeah.
Just maybe tell us a little bit more, particularly about Ministry of Football. I remember when I was still back in Australia, probably 3 years ago or so now, coming across, I think initially you on Twitter and then your website, and I certainly got quickly intrigued by the Ministry of Football philosophy and ideas. So can you just expand a little bit on it?
Yeah, sure. So Ministry of Football is a program based in North London. We strongly believe, we are a sort of a little community now, but when it started off, it was literally just me and two kids turned up to the first session sort of 8 years ago. But the idea is that it's football for everybody. So boys, girls, regardless of ability or confidence levels, from kids who are, at academy levels, or kids who are literally beginners and lack confidence. Football for anybody and everybody. And we try and make it sort of local football. We don't advertise over a wide area. Strong believers that football shouldn't be something that you spend a lot of time getting to or from. It's all indoors, so we're never cancelled. We always get good environment to play and learn in. And it's all about small-sided football, intense, challenging sessions with expert coaches to guide the children.
Cool. And I'm sure Al will have some questions about it. I've seen some of your sessions and been fortunate to see them, and it's some really impressive stuff. I guess if we backtrack, in terms of your journey, I think we're always interested in coaches' journeys and sort of what's led up to the point you are now. What's been your journey, Mark? Where did you start, and what have been some of the key things that I guess shape now how you have structured and designed Ministry of Football?
Well, I think the key thing is way before I became any kind of educator, when, like all of us, when we were at school and when we were learning ourselves. I mean, I think for all of us that really shapes our views on education. Even the words school, learning, academy, club, teacher, coach, these are all words that conjure up in our mind a particular thing or a particular feeling. And it all comes from our own feelings at school, really. And I was one of these children, although academically I think the word bright was used in those days. Gifted and talented now, perhaps, who knows. I couldn't stand school. I got very frustrated with it. I wasn't able to really vocabularize that frustration at a young age. And it was in stark contrast to the life I led outside of school, where I was in environments playing football with friends without any adults or coaches or teachers around. And that was really childhood for me, being stuck in school, being taught to, and very, very teacher heavy sedentary classes, and then learning football by myself with my friends. So I think that what we look at with Ministry of Football is trying to take the best bits of the second environment there, child-led, adult-free, pressure-free football, where you're learning through collaboration, through play, etc. But adding to that the best bits of school, because there were one or two teachers at school who, really did, click with me for bizarre reasons, as as always, I think you ask someone who your favourite teacher is and why. It's usually something really daft. I mean, so we sort of try and take the best bits of that teaching, which isn't, in my experience, a lot of subject knowledge necessarily. It's more to do with being a subtle guidance to, especially to children who can't quite fit in with the group, to manage that group dynamic and change it where it needs to be changed, so that you're really bringing out that collaboration between children. You're managing the competition, obviously, in football, which is tricky at times. But you're grouping the children in such a way that they have variety, they have the chance to be with their friends, but be with other people. And so all of those things come from my time at school, really. Although, like I say, I didn't really start putting those pieces together until way after I started coaching. I mean, I look back at the first coaching sessions I delivered, and I can still remember very much having serious behavioural issues from the children, which I look back now and realise that was because I really hadn't considered their needs at all. I literally just, it was all about me, you know. I mean, I remember a particular free kick session that I was doing with kids when I first started coaching. I took all the free kicks. I was just getting them to watch me, really, you know. It really was that kind of, look, I know everything and I'm going to show you it all.
Yeah.
So even, you know, it's an interesting one, because even after school and all that frustration, I still started teaching that way, the same way that I disliked, found frustrating, etc. So that's the first part of it. I think the second part of it would be moving overseas to coach and teach. I'm a teacher of English, and I went to Papua New Guinea for 3 years where I was teaching, and I was involved for part of that time with a group of people who were looking at education in the country. It was an Australian curriculum that was being used there that didn't really fit with the needs of the learners at school. It wasn't particularly relevant to learn, you know, the history, the maths, etc. for jobs that might exist in Australia, but there certainly weren't those futures necessarily for the kids there. So we were looking at, well, what's relevant education for these children? And we started doing projects in secondary schools where we were looking at rice growing, agriculture, self-reliance projects, and trying to turn the curriculum so that it fit with the environment, the needs of those children. And that got me really thinking about, well, what is school for? If we could start school all over again, what would it actually look like? If we didn't have the history and we didn't have the expectations of what it is like now, I think it would probably look very different, really, and I think it should do. In terms of PE, it strikes me very, very strange that we separate the education of the physical in school from the education of all the other bits. And we say, 40 minutes, we're going to educate you physically in a week or whatever. And the rest of the time, I suppose it's implied it's non-physical. And my experience of being human really is that it's a physical experience, also an emotional experience, social experience. But these parts of education, when you look at the real relevance for the children, are kind of, you've got your PE lesson, and then the rest of it is all just about knowledge, history, geography, French, etc. It's just, it doesn't seem to me to fit, really. And these are the kind of self-reflective kind of questions I had during that time overseas. So by the time I came back to this country following another 4 years in New Zealand, I was quite sure that I wanted to set something up for kids that didn't have any kind of, it was fresh, it was new, it was based on, let's find out what these children, these families really need and deliver what that is, rather than just set up a football program like every other football program. And then the final part is really, since then, the people I've met, especially the people I've coached with. I was lucky enough to coach with a chap called Luke Hines, who is now a secondary PE teacher for 6 years at Ministry of Football. And having someone who will challenge you, who will discuss and debate in depth, as I'm sure you two do, you know, exactly what's happening in sessions, how to structure programs, and just bounce questions off each other. For a lot of the questions, there aren't really answers, I think, but it's just through that discussion you know, through the discussion, you work out maybe a little bit closer to the next question, whatever that might be. So I've started to see my coaching journey, rather than finding out answers, it's moving from one question to another. And it's not necessarily the case that you find the answer in order to move to the next question. It's just more, right, this is the problem I got at the moment, this is the challenge, this is what I'm not sure about, this is what I'm not clear on. And the more collaboration that you can have with other people, the more you can grow, change, develop, which I think is a reflection of how I learned to play, how we all learn to play when we're kids.
Yeah.
Until adults intervene. That's a fascinating little synopsis there, Mark. There's lots of things I'm really interested to explore more. I guess one of the things that I can immediately get a sense of what your environment would look like if I walked into it. What I'm curious about is how you go about attuning to the needs of those kids. And I guess within that, I say age-old problem because it is a problem for most people with the approach they take to it, but I'm curious as to whether it is a problem for you of engaging parents and getting parents aligned to what you're trying to achieve. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that is a huge issue. Now, the places where we currently run the Ministry of Football programme, demographically, they're quite affluent areas. And it means that we are able to communicate with parents a lot by email. They all have email addresses. They all use technology. We can do things like videos. We can send them links, etc. And a lot of the parents will read those things. Will get back to you. We'll ask questions, and it will often be in electronic format, which makes things a bit easier. And in doing that, you can send messages across. I send weekly emails with things that are happening and the reason why we run a session like we do, or just anything I can find on the internet which sort of links with our values and our beliefs. And I mention that because we tried to run a Ministry of Football programme for parts of Islington a few years ago, and took exactly the same kind of method. But what we found straight away was in different demographics, some people don't read or speak English well. Others don't have email addresses that they'd use, and the communication with the parents was incredibly different and needed to be face-to-face, which caused different kinds of challenges. So I totally agree that I don't think there's one solution. I suppose what I'm trying to say, it really very much depends on what your parent group is like, how you can communicate with them. We've tried, for example, recently when we have coaches meetings at Ministry of Football, we invite any parent on the programme who wants to come along and sit in our coaches meeting. They can come and sit, and they can come and chip in and put their point of view and ask questions. We've offered parents' evenings before, where parents can come and chat with the coaches after sessions. We do surveys. Just got one out at the moment because we've got a new coaching program we've started at Ministry of Football this term to sort of we probably get about half the parents on the program completing an online survey to tell us what they think, and some of it's kind of tick box so we can get an overall kind of idea of where we're at, but a lot of it's sort of much more qualitative. Give us a scenario that you could see that your child had learned something, or what's impact has it overall had on your child. Those kind of questions that we can try and gather, well, what are we really doing? Because I think the parents, they're absolute experts on those children. We as coaches might be experts in a particular subject, and we like to think we might be experts at learning, whatever that is. But parents are really expert in, my child is not the same as they were 6 months ago. And I can kind of describe that in a particular way, hard to measure obviously, but they can tell you, or my child doesn't want to go to football as much as they used to. Interesting. Okay, so let's think about that. Why not? So that conversation with parents, I think, is absolutely vital.
And how have you gone, Mark, with the dynamic where, having seen some of your sessions, it is more, let's just use the word, a game-centered approach, and any verbal interventions you guys have, tend to be short and sharp and to the point. So that seemingly there's not a lot of coach direction and involvement, and often parents have that perception of what a coach should be doing. Have you come across that challenge and a situation of how you've maybe successfully dealt with it, if you like, or opened parents' eyes to the method you're using?
Yeah, I mean, that was a problem. What you've described there was also sort of 4 years in New Zealand. I was coaching there, and again, you've got a stereotypical idea of what a coach should do. And yes, we do have that in the Ministry of Football now. We have one or two parents whose feedback to us at the end of last term, in fact, as recent as that, was kind of, I don't understand why you bring the children in, you give them some questions or something, and then it goes, if I could quote sort of, it goes in one ear and out of another for the children. Why don't you get in and actually tell them what to do? And some parents do really want to see that, because I think from a parent's point of view on the sideline watching, it must be quite frustrating at times to see your child make what you consider mistakes and what most people would say are mistakes without being corrected. It must be frustrating, because you end up thinking, well, if we carry on like that, it's going to take ages for them to learn anything. And they may, to an extent, be right. You've got to have a patience with that attitude, because it's to some extent correct. If we corrected that child immediately every time, we would be able to make probably a short-term difference to what they do. But it would break up the flow of the lesson. And what I try and tell parents in that situation is, it's not just about learning. It's also about enjoyment. And for me, a child who is constantly being corrected and constantly being interrupted, and the session constantly being very coach heavy with longer interruptions about very specific things, no, stop there, you've got to do it like this, etc. I think the flow of the session, which is where I think a lot of enjoyment and learning happens, just disappears. So those are the kind of messages we try and get across. We have very few parents who don't understand it. But I'll be honest, there are some parents who don't get it and do then leave the program to go and find something that's closer to what they want, which I think is fine.
There's no shortage of those things either. I think one of the things I'm interested in that you reflect on a little bit on your website, Mark, is the comparison between what you're doing and what a kid might experience in a football academy, which I guess you've started to touch on there. But I'm interested in, I suppose that there's a few specific experiences you described on your website about kids who went from Ministry of Football to an academy or between the two, and I'm really interested to hear a bit more about those comparisons from your side point of view, but I guess also from the kids' point of view.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think academies are very different. It's easy to sort of put them all in the same basket, but they will be different. I do think that they are the really, really good solution for some children. I think they're exactly what some children need to learn in football, but also to grow in other ways. But the tricky bit is the transition from one to another. You've got, for kids on a program like Ministry of Football, which is a very pressure-free, stress-free, free-flowing, game-based approach to enjoyment, to learning. With we group the children where they need to be, and that changes each week. And it's not about performance. It's about let's. Obviously, there's some expectations of behaviour, but it's not really about what you can do so much. In my experience of academy football, even when academies really make an effort to take that pressure away, and they do, it's not like they don't make an effort and they don't get it, they do. These are expert coaches as well, and they really make a very big effort to take the pressure off the children, but it's an academy, and when the child goes there, they feel pressure because they know that there's a certain number of children that they can have in that group, and if they don't fit, or if they don't perform, or if they do the wrong things over and over again, then they can be shown the door. And this is a chance for, so many kids want to make it as a footballer. This is a dream that they've got, and it's incredibly difficult for children and for parents, because parents are obviously stressed, pressured too. They're pressured in terms of their time. Ministry of Football is an hour a week, and it's meant to be sort of a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute drive to get to us. If you're at an academy that's an hour away, and you've got to be there 3 times a week, that's a massive commitment for a parent to make as well. It has an effect on other siblings too. And and you want that child, therefore, to be onto it every session, coming out of there going, yeah, you did really well. In fact, you did better than so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. So when they have their next retain or release meeting, whenever that might be, you've got a good chance. And that's for a child as young as 9 or 10 is a crazy situation to be in when we talk about development of creative footballers, development of people who can get on with others and collaborate well. It just doesn't really make sense to me. So in terms of Ministry of Football, yes, we've had children come from our program being complete beginners and go on to, sign for Premier League clubs, which is something we're very proud of. But I think an even more consistent achievement of ours is to take kids who are not really joining in the playground, who don't have great movement skills, who aren't confident, and we've given them access to a part of them that doesn't care so much that they're not good at it yet. They just want to play, and they're able there to join in, and they have the skills to say, hey, can I play too, kind of, and that for me is just as important.
So when you say they just want to play, I'm really interested in, because I guess one of the phrases that's bandied about a lot in kids' football development is ability grouping. But what you seem to be talking about is something a bit more subtle, that's about needs grouping almost. Do the kids seek out ability challenges? Do they seek out competition? Does competition surface through their desire? I guess that if I watch a group of kids in the park where no one's involved, it's pretty competitive stuff, but it's on their terms.
Yeah. I don't think we need to teach children competition. Most children there'll be some who struggle and need help, but most children, given the ball and some other people, some of whom might be friends, some not, will find a way of making a game. They're usually, even at young ages, they'll try and keep score. The competition is something that needs to be managed by the adult if it gets out of hand, and we need to teach them good behaviours within that. But I don't think we need to get overly fussed about the competition side of it. But the grouping side of it, I think, is absolutely key. It's the one thing. If I was to take the one bit of learning of Ministry of Football over the 8 years we've been going, it's about grouping children. For me, it has to be the thing about grouping in football is that the other children are the learning tools for each child. So they learn from each other. If you have a child who is just far advanced in terms of their understanding of a game, their speed, their strength, their ball control, they can act as a very, very good teacher for others, but it's hard for them to then get challenged, so they push on. Likewise, a child at the bottom of a group, however that might look, whether that's socially, emotionally, technically, tactically, physically, will struggle to join in, which might actually be good for them in terms of catching up, but for them to teach others will be a bit trickier. So for me, the key thing with grouping is that it's varied. Children come in and they have 3 or 4 different games that they'll play with 3 or 4 different groups, and there'll be different tasks, some of which they might find easy relatively, others which will be challenging. And so in any 1 hour session at Ministry of Football, a child should play on at least 3 or 4 different teams, 3 or 4 different games, against or with different children, so that competition happens. But within that competition, the learning is right for all those children. And it's partly about age, but more it's about speed of thought, confidence. The physical aspect of it makes a difference. We had a coach come in last Sunday and watch me run my 5 o'clock group. And at the end, we were talking about the children. He said, what school year are these guys? Are they year 3? And they were actually children from years 1, 2, 3, and 4, all put together in one group. But the year 1, very advanced. If he played with the other year 1s, it just wouldn't necessarily make sense for them. And the year 4s, again, physically not that big and still able to play in that group. So it kind of works. And the key thing is it changes. So in next term it'll be different for them. Next week it might be different.
Mark, I guess we've sort of covered the kids, the parents, yourself. The other bit of the equation you just mentioned, another coach there, is is how do the coaches that come in and help you or get involved, what are the challenges they find with the approach you use, if any?
That's a good question. See, I don't think that what we do at Ministry of Football is rocket science. I really don't. I think it's actually quite straightforward. But sometimes when I try and explain what we do, I find myself waffling to the extent to which it can't be that simple, because I've just spent half an hour giving so much waffle. One of the things I have to learn to do is explain better what I want from coaches. It seems to me, we get lots of coaches come in and see what we do. Every time I put a job advert out for a coach, I get at least 100 CVs back. And I invite sort of usually 5 to 10 of those to come in to watch and talk to them, let them see what we do. If they're still interested and they turn up, then 2 or 3 of them will come and do maybe a trial session, a taster session. But even then, there's very few who can run a session which includes everybody, which offers challenge and support in the right parts of the session, which allows games to flow in realistic, age-appropriate ways, which interventions are concise, efficient, effective, and with that, there's some technical knowledge where there needs to be some technical knowledge. So, I mean, I don't know. I do think perhaps it's trickier than I think it is. I wonder to what extent, we've got the new youth module courses now at the BFA. Well, they're not that new anymore.
No.
And they're much better than the old level 1 and 2 things. So coach education is getting better. I still think there needs to be within that education a lot more emphasis on the social and emotional needs of the children. When you do your qualifications and your badges, really, if you can do a session with some technical information and you can get in and coach a little bit, you're going to pass, your 1 or 2 anyway. So they have, the FA obviously have their 4-corner model. So they have obviously considering emotional and social development, psychological development, but I think it needs to be a lot more detailed. I think that on these courses we need to really be talking about what learning might look like. What are the obstacles to learning that might have happened before that child even comes to your session? One of the things I think we do well at Ministry of Football is that it's not just about learning. If a child just wants to come and they've had a bad day, they've had a rubbish weekend, and they just want to zone out and play football, and they'll put up with a 1-minute intervention from a coach, but they just want to get through it and just enjoy it, and then you know what, that's okay. That doesn't, but doing that emphasis on enjoyment isn't, I think, as simple as people think. I think it really does matter if you see children who aren't involved in that game to go and help them somehow by either adjusting the challenge, helping them access those enjoyable flow states that we want them all to enjoy and appreciate.
Absolutely, and I think clearly again, the things you're talking about, I guess, often in football terms you talk about triggers and cues, don't we, of the things you're looking for as a coach. So as Al mentioned earlier, I guess that I can imagine one of the challenges of coaching, in that way and in your sessions is how tuned in you have to be of how into what are the dynamics at play and how is each child adapting or what state are they in today. And I can imagine, so it demands a hell of a lot from the coach, doesn't it, to do that, which again is something we've spoken about before, actually, to be more hands-off but certainly child-centered, player-centered, demands a hell of a lot of the coach. Yeah,
it does, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we've got a coaching team of 5 of us at the moment, and we have regular catch-ups, and these are the kind of things we're talking about. We just had a last weekend we did a coach ed weekend, so that all the coaches came in for an extra hour or 2 and watched one of the other coaches working, had an hour afterwards to sort of dissect the session and reflect on these things. And so I think these are all things that we can learn and improve and get better at if the right sort of programs put together. I mean, I think linked to that, something that's interesting with the grouping, because I don't think Ministry of Football is perfect in any way, and it's evolving and growing. But just thinking about what you just said there, Mark, and what Al asked about grouping, it strikes me that when we move children between groups at Ministry of Football, which happens fairly often, we're often quite hesitant about moving a child up a group, whatever that might be, you know, whether it's to an older group or to a faster group, or and we discuss it quite a lot as coaches, but almost without fail, every time we've done it, we find that that child can cope perfectly well in that new group. Maybe not straight away, but after a week or two. And it strikes me that because that seems to me to sort of hint that actually children are sometimes well within their capabilities, and that we group them in ways that we think is about where they're at, and we leave them there, and that is where they're at because that's where we've left them. Whereas if we can manage that grouping so that all children have a chance to be pushed beyond where they're at, I think that's, for me, coping and learning are actually two very closely linked things. So you throw a child in at the deep end a bit, and you give them the assistance they might need, and they learn to cope, and then they learn to beyond cope. And I think that is kind of what learning might look like. And obviously it's very specific to the environment. So what they've learned to cope with is very specific at Ministry of Football to indoor 3v3, 4v4 games. It doesn't necessarily mean they can go out and play 11-a-side football. So they need a variety of different environments like that. But I think that links a bit to sort of school groupings, you know, setting of children. The key bit being variety. The groups can't be static. And in football, and this is the one big thing I learned in New Zealand, where I was a coaching director of a very big club there, is every year we would do trials and put children in a particular team in a particular league, and they'd stay there until the next year. And they would just become totally comfortable within that. And thus, I think there was just restrictions on what they could do. So linking that back to the coaching, I think that is where the coach needs to sort of see, okay, that's the groups we've got. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what those children are capable of. It may well be that they're well within their limit at the moment. So the coaching is really, how do we take that further? How do we push these children a little bit to get them so that they're not just going through the motions, that there's actually some kind of coping going on for all of them.
Absolutely. Al, have you got anything else? I've got one other question to fire, but have you got anything else?
Yeah, I guess that one of the things I was really curious about, there's a little tool technique that you use at Ministry of Football, which I can see an immediate benefit for the kids in terms of getting that enrichment and engagement and making sure they enjoy the experience, but I'm really interested in what impact it has on the coaches and what you just described of the coach attuning to what's going on and figuring out whether kids are being challenged at the right level. And it's your use of music. And I guess the fact that, I mean, obviously music stirs the creative juices and all those really good things, and it gets people socially engaged, but I'm interested in the side of it for the coach that means verbal communication's been pretty much taken out of the picture, so what's left for the coach to pay attention to and attune to coach?
Yeah, it's a good, it's a good point, and I don't have a hard and fast concrete answer to that. When I first started Ministry of Football, the music was a big part of it. It was kind of like, wow, football to music. It's kind of a bit of the branding there, you know. Not many people were doing that then. And actually now, to be honest, you could probably take the music out of the program, and I think it would still be the same, essentially the same program. But the music for me has a few benefits and a few challenges for the coaches. So among the benefits are yes, the things that Al mentions, but also the other two bits are, especially at young ages, you've got, you know, a 6-year-old, 7-year-old session. The parents almost always stay to watch those sessions. So you've got along the side of the hall 30 or more parents, all quite anxiously watching their children because it might be the first time they've done football. Now, what that music can do is just prevent those parents from calling things out, from being too involved instructionally from the sideline, because the children won't necessarily be able to hear them. But I think that the main thing for the music is the behaviours of the children. What we've noticed on sessions where, let's say, the music machine's broken or the iPod's run out of battery or whatever, is we start to get more, I'm not going to call it antisocial behaviour, but let's say non-football behaviours. So much more much more social kind of what did you do at the weekend type communication between the children, but also much more that was a goal, that wasn't kind of arguments, and much more it's 2-0, no, it's 3-0, let's have an argument about that kind of behaviours. Whereas when the music's on, I think partly because of the beat of the music means that children want to move. They just want to continue. They don't want to get stuck on this argument, let's keep going. But also, it's a little bit harder for them to hear each other from across the hall. So that argument only happens while they're within an earshot, and then it just disintegrates, it evaporates, it's not there anymore. And I don't think there's a science behind that. It's just a kind of feeling I have that the music has helped the behaviours. It helps children just find their place and don't worry about so-and-so who's just sort of pushed them a minute ago or whatever, you know. It allows them to continue in and find that flow a little bit quicker again once they're disturbed. In terms of the coaches, yeah, there have been coaches who have come in and said, you know what, I really like what you do, but I could never work in that music environment. Don't like it, don't want to be there. And I can understand that. When I coached at Watford were using, Watford Academy were using samba music a few years ago. And you know, a lot of places do this now, but at Watford, you see, they couldn't turn the music off. It was on the whole time. And so when you wanted to actually coach, you had to roar above it. And it was I found it really difficult. But what we have at Ministry of Football is you know, you could just walk over, turn the music off anytime you want. Any coach can. And in that silence that happens when you turn that music off, children know, all right, coach wants to have a quick intervention or a quick question, or you know, or it's a quick drink break or whatever. So the children become accustomed to music on, play, go, play. Music off, coach's little time. And actually, if you can imagine a situation where the coach is talking to 2 or 3 children or a group of children and it's dead quiet in the hall and all their parents are sitting along the side, it can be quite hard, I think, for some of those children to answer a question. Whereas if you've got some music on such that the parents can't necessarily hear what's happening in that group, it may be that might be easier for that child to sort of say, well, I don't really get this, or, you know, don't understand, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a science behind it. I'd like to know more. The coaches I've got at the moment, I think 1 or 2 of them put up with the music, and I think 1 or 2 of them really, really enjoy it and get a lot out of it. But maybe it's a personal tasting.
I guess it begs the question: who gets to choose the soundtracks, Mark?
I've had quite a lot of stick for it, believe me. It's a bit old, apparently.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe a topic to finish up on, Mark, and maybe taps into the third interest you have, or what's going on in terms of your statistician's background, and that's the hot topic of measuring learning, which I know has sort of been over Twitter a bit in the last week and something we've discussed in the past. I guess a lot of the discussion's more been on the how, but I'm interested in probably just taking a step back into the why. So why do you feel that we need to actually measure learning?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we need. I mean, why do we need to measure it? So we need to measure it in order to improve learning. Basically, that would be the end result. It's a bit like, you know, I work with these 15 primary schools, and part of what they have to do in PE is assessment for pupils. To be honest, a lot of what primary schools do in PE for assessment is they tick some boxes. A child can, you know, I've just seen them catch a ball 5 times in an hour, tick that they can do that. You know, if they watch 10 minutes later, they see 5 dropped catches and they'll tick something else. But then that sheet goes into a filing cabinet or on a computer, and it's never really used. So in that sense, measuring learning, I mean, I'm not sure what's being measured, and there's no real purpose to that anyway. So working with those schools and at Ministry of Football, what we're trying to do is work ways where we can try and, I wouldn't say measure, I'd say assess learning, see if we can try and break it down, find some evidence for it. But the reason why is to get a better understanding of the association between our teaching and interventions as adults in children's playtime and what's happening to those children over time. So at the moment, we know that children change. I mean, I've got a 4-year-old, and I know that a year ago he's very different from what he is now. And most people say, well, that's just him growing up, and it probably is. But also the way that they're changing, how have I as a parent affected that? What did I do? What could I do differently to have a different impact? And those relationships I find fascinating. I'm not sure that we can really measure it in any kind of banding or any kind of percentage kind of way. I think learning is not linear enough to do that, and I'd be hesitant about doing it. And in football, I think there would be a tendency to measure what we see in terms of a child's control of a ball or their decision to pass it. And we could also measure what we hear in terms of asking questions and getting some answers. But we wouldn't be able to measure the key bit, which is really what's happening in that brain in terms of the thoughts that are going on, the feelings that are going on over a long time. That some children just wouldn't be able to tell us about that in a way that we could even start to understand it and measure. So I think that might sort of help explain the why. I do think that there is a lot we could learn from measuring environments, and I do think you can measure those. I mean, one of the things we do at Ministry of Football is we measure active learning time. So every coach, twice a term, will have one of the other coaches come along with a sheet and a stopwatch, and in an hour session they will measure how much time those children have to play and learn by doing and by playing. And you can imagine that it's a very different experience being a child or even an adult in a session where you've got 45 minutes of an hour, which is active learning time, or, as is often the case in PE in schools, sort of 6 to 10 minutes. Hugely more frustrating for a child to be in a situation where, you know, they're sat there for an hour, but they've got 6 or 10 minutes of learning. Behaviours are different. And if we make the sort of assumption that learning happens, or most learning happens best by actually doing it, by doing the thing, then we could measure how much doing happens. We could also measure the amount of, you know, the kind of teacher intervention. Are the teacher interventions to manage behaviours? Are they to deliver technical information? There's other things we could measure. You know, I also think it's really important to not just look at learning that happens in the session, but to look at, let's say, active learning time. I think in a lot of programs for young kids, they actually, I mean, we did some work on this at Ministry of Football a few months ago. We found that kids in grassroots football on a Saturday will take, or Sunday, whatever their game is, will take 2 hours out of their family time to do that football, from leaving the house to coming back. But actually less than half an hour actually playing football. So there's a measurement in itself.
Yeah.
You're taking 4 minutes of your weekend for 1 minute of playing football. Now, obviously there's issues about how good that environment is for learning anyway, etc. But it's not just about the football game. We have to look at the whole experience for the child and their family. It's not, you know, you can't just look at the environment in isolation of how you get there and what you're committing to. In academy football, you're looking at, you know, 6 hours. 3 hours is common to be giving up your 3 or 4 hours of your weekend for, again, sort of half an hour on a football pitch.
Yeah. Al, have you got any? I'm sure you got plenty of thoughts / questions, but
yeah, no, I think at this point we're probably reaching a natural end point. It's been a fascinating discussion. There's a ton of things I did before we came online. Mark, you said we could chat for 24 hours, and I'm pretty sure we could. But I think that it probably makes sense at this point to wrap up and pick up the conversation another time.
But I'd just add that that this, I guess, measuring, analysing the environment, like Mark's talked about. Mark has got some really good stuff on his website as examples of that, of how many touches they're getting at the active learning time. So I'd really encourage people to, if they're interested in that, to jump on his Ministry of Football site and the blog, and they'll find where he's done some really good work, and there's some really good videos as well to exemplify what he's talking about. So personally, I think that area around measuring learning is a really interesting one, and I think Mark's doing a pretty good job with some simple yet effective stuff.
Brilliant. Cool. Thanks guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Mark. Pleasure. Hopefully have a chat to you maybe again in the future.
Look forward to it.
Okay. Cheers.